I did not mention, because we devoted the first hour to exposing and condemning Islam's caustic influence on civilization, and that we went in our second hour to a condemnation of Easter and the pagan practice of Christianity, and then moved to Yahowah's testimony regarding a nation like America and the ultimate referendum, the election between candidate A and candidate Y. I did not mention the leaflet in the Ukraine. I collected 4 or 5 stories on it, read what there is to read about it. It is important to discuss because God speaks in this particular prophecy of anti-Semitism, of hatred of God's chosen people, both the Israelites and Yahudim, as becoming so perverse, so intense, so intolerable, that God himself is going to intervene now a third time. He intervened once because Israel's defensive forces were unable to drive the horde of Muslim invaders and terrorists out of the land. And he intervened to rid the world of Islamic aggression. He intervened again to demonstrate the difference between America and what it stood for and what he stands for, so that everyone on the planet would have the opportunity to make a choice. He's going to intervene a third time, which is to remove all Jews from America and to personally take them to the Promised Land. It's the Spirit who's going to provide the ride. And so God is telling us that this anti-Semitism that is brewing now in the world, and particularly now festering in the United States, that is causing the United States to advocate looting Israel, thinning the nation at the waist, giving the Promised Land to the various Muslims who seek to destroy God's place and people, that the consequence of that puts him in a position that the only way that he can honor his commitment and his promise to Abraham to reconcile his relationship with his people is to save them from America. Now, the reason I bring this up is because of the referendum and the document that is being circulated in the Ukraine. The fact of the matter is, no one on the ground knows who is behind it. The leader of the pro-Russian movement, and by the way, to call them pro-Russian movement, they are Russians. The eastern Ukraine was never part of the Ukraine. It was always part of Russia. Why the eastern region, which is called New Russia, ever was amalgamated into an entity of the Ukraine, no one seems to know. But the Russians that live there claim, who are now saying that we don't want to be part of the Ukraine, we want to be part of Russia as we always have been, say that they didn't write it. And the Ukrainians are saying, are trying to present it as if they didn't write it either. But here's the reality. There is no group of people on earth, including jihadist Muslims, who are as viciously anti-Semitic as the Ukrainians. They are the worst example of humanity when it comes to their overt animosity towards and viciousness against Yahweh's chosen people. So when you see a document that smacks of Nazism and the approach to the Holocaust, of Jews being told that they must register, must disclose all of their property, and that they must identify themselves and their property to authorities, what you're seeing there is what happened in the Ukraine during the 2 most horrific acts during the Holocaust, where Ukrainians, in concert with the Nazis murdered more Jews than any other community. And so since the Ukrainians have a horrid history of being ruthless against the Jews through their pogroms, prior to the rise of Nazism, in fact, decades prior to the rise of Nazism, and then throughout Nazism was the attacks on Jews and the mass murder of Jews was worse in the Western Ukraine than any other place in all of occupied Europe. They are the very people that embody this the sentiment that's on that document. Now, that's not to say that the pro-Russian sympathizers are good people. It's not to say that it wouldn't be something that they could do. The fact is that politically, Jews have shown allegiance with some unsavory characters. I mean, you look at the Christians and how they responded to the Muslim Brotherhood, and then how they were shown to have endorsed Sisi, the general, who is now called open season on hunting and killing Christians. They showed political allegiance to a man that they should not have. In the case with the Jews in the eastern Ukraine, they did the same thing, and so I'm sure some of the pro-Russians are adverse to them for what they did. Shouldn't have done it. And so could it be the pro-Russian separatists that are perpetrating this unofficially? Yeah, it's possible. What it demonstrates is that in that region of the world, and throughout the world, particularly throughout Europe, anti-Semitism is on full boil. And it is about to become full boil even here in America. And so Yahowah is issuing this warning because he himself is going to have to intervene again to remove his children and take them to the promised land, because the world, America and Europe. Now, America is where 42% of the world's Jewish population lives. Another 42% lives in Israel. 85% of the world's Jewish population is between those two countries. Well, the largest segment that's not already in the promised land is going to be taken there, brought home, because of where we are headed as people. So while I think that to some degree the document that was talked about in the Ukraine is a false flag, I can tell you that it represents the sentiments to some degree on both sides. Although, to be fair to Putin, in Putin's Russia, anti-Semitism has been far less prevalent than probably at any time in recent memory associated with Russia. Now, let's return to the prophecy, recognizing how perverse the world is becoming and how much angst the world is demonstrating towards God. And let me also be clear that most of the Russians who are adverse to Jews fall into one of two categories. They're either stalwarts of the old socialist, secular, humanist movement in Russia, and therefore communist and atheists, and don't realize that it was Jews that wrote the documents that enabled their religion, or they are Orthodox Christians, Russian Orthodox Christians, which should be the vast majority of them, where their Christianity is what is driving their anti-Semitism. And either way, it is demonic. No matter what the foibles may be of political Israel, whatever your view may be, the fact of the matter is, Israel is God's favorite place on earth. And Israelites are his favorite people on earth. And if you are opposed to him, there is absolutely no way that you can have a relationship with God. So if you find yourself a racist, if you find yourself anti-Semitic, if you find yourself embracing conspiracy theories that are focused at blaming Jews, you need to know there is no room for you in God's home. Now, returning to the text, God says, "So then with regard to the forsaken castaways, they will be completely rejected and totally removed, cut off, and separated." That's Yahowah 18:5. That is very different than the fate of the vast preponderance of souls described throughout the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. The vast majority of the time that God speaks about estranged souls, he says that they die and they cease to exist. Dying and ceasing to exist is vastly superior when it comes to one's relationship with God than being forsaken castaways, of being completely rejected and totally removed. At this point, when the election takes place for your soul between Exhibit A, Candidate A, America and what America represents, and Candidate Y, Yahowah, and what he is offering, you need to know that if you choose Candidate A at that time, you will be branded with Candidate A. You'll be branded with this mark that's associated with the beast. And at that point, you will be not only permanently and irreconcilably estranged from heaven and from God, you will no longer have the luxury, if you will, the opportunity to have your soul cease to exist upon your earthly demise. At that point, you are branded as being a co-conspirator against God, and so you will be forever a forsaken castaway. You will be completely rejected and totally removed, cut off and separated. That means that you would spend eternity in Sheol. You don't want to take brand A. You want to be really careful. If you are a patriotic individual today, if you rally around your military, if you salute your flag, if you think that your country provides you freedom and independence and opportunity, if that is your mindset today, you want to be really careful, because right now that mindset can be corrected. But a day is coming when the referendum is offered, when Yahowah's testimony is mounted on top of the upright pillar on top of the mountain, and he blows his shofar to bring your attention to his way and to his standard. If at that point you choose to continue to be patriotic, to be religious, to be political, to be militaristic, this is your fate. It's eternal separation from God. No more fooling around. Yes, indeed, my friends, the kind of document that's being circulated in the Ukraine that says that you must, if you are a Jew, you must register yourself with the authorities, that you must disclose your property so that it is easily confiscated, that you must submit to special rules regarding you, is exactly what's going to happen around the world. That leaflet won't be unique. It will be common. But here's a part that is every bit as chilling. If you're not on that list, if that list, which it will be expanded to anyone choosing to trust and rely on Yahowah, to celebrate Yahowah's Shabbat, to celebrate Yahowah's invitations to meet with him, to embrace the Torah. If you do these things, just as was the case in Constantine's day and Imperial Rome, if you do these things, you will be viewed as a criminal, someone to abuse, someone to enslave, someone to kill, someone whose property is fair game. But if you are on that list, to be deprived of your property, to be deprived of your life, then you're on the only list that really matters, because you will inherit the universe. Because at that moment, if you are genuinely committed to Yahowah, you will live forever. It is the right list to be on. rather than saying, you know, we ought to condemn what's happening in Russia in terms of that list. We ought to celebrate it. We really ought to. Is it wrong for man to be promoting it? Darn right. Does it show how repulsive we are as humans? That is correct. Ought we not have studied the anti-Semitic history of the Ukraine so we understand that these are amongst the most despicable people on earth? Darn right. But they aren't alone. And the reason we ought to celebrate this, it's another confirmation that what Yahowah told us was going to happen is happening. It's another confirmation when God said that the way to him was narrow and few find it, and the way that was in opposition to him that leads to death and destruction was wide, and that most find it. That when we come to embrace that, then we know that the way of religion, the way of politics, the way of militancy is wrong. And that the path to God is indeed narrow, and very few find it. And that while you don't want to be identified on it as being a individual who is known only by race, when you come to know what Yisrael means, when you come to know what Yahowah means, then you'll want to be on that list. Because Yisrael means individuals who engage and endure with God. The Mother of the Covenant's name is in the midst of that name. Yisrael. And if you come to know what Yahowah means, which is the basis of the corrupt transliteration Jew today, that Yahowah means those who relate to Yah and those who are related to Yah. We become related to Yah, his sons and daughters, part of his covenant family by relating to him. And what do we relate to him? We listen to him. We observe his Torah guidance. We listen to what he has to say. We come to know him. We come to understand what he's offering, and we respond. We say, I do. That's what it's all about. And so ultimately, if you are on that list because you have chosen to be a Israelite, an individual who engages and endures with God, if you're on that list because you have become Yahowah and a Yahudim, someone who relates to Yahweh and has become related to Yahweh, then that's the gift and the list of life. That's the list of those who have a relationship with God. That's the list of those who will inherit the universe. It's a really good list to be on. But by having such a list, what Yahowah is telling us is that there will be this divide. You will have a choice. It's the ultimate referendum. Whose side are you going to be on? And do you understand the consequence? And do you know that you can't have both? You cannot be a patriotic member of Yahweh's family, nor a religious member of his family. We'll return in a moment. Speaking of a referendum on an agreement, I mentioned in the previous hour that I've been in a lot of negotiations over my business career. And I've never seen any negotiation succeed when one party demeans the other, or where an agreement was one-sided. And the way that America announced their conclusions of what occurred in Geneva relative to the Ukraine was such an event. And so I found it interesting today because it said that the Russian separatists would leave the buildings and will walk out of those buildings, turn over their arms, and they would talk about reunification with the whole of Ukraine. And that's the opposite of what they want. It's the opposite of what they're going to do, and there's zero chance that they would have agreed to such a thing. They looked at the agreement the opposite way that America did. That's what you would expect. You know, you've got two groups of people that are talking at each other as opposed to with each other. And so the separatists and who are actually not separatists because they want what is Eastern Ukraine, which is New Russia, to be part of the totality of Russia as it has always been. They want to separate only from the Ukraine. They said, well, we think it's a very fair deal. That was what was agreed with in Geneva. Very fair deal. As soon as the illegitimate government in Kiev walks out of government buildings, we'll walk out of government buildings. And they're right. There is no more legitimacy to the government that is in Kiev versus the government that's in any one of these 20 eastern new Russian cities. None. It's just the example of how when people fail to know enough information to even be able to talk intelligently or offer a solution, they often make the situation worse. Hello, Glenn. Welcome.
Hello, Yada. I heard a little bit of the past half hour or so, or I've been woke up at the holidays and kids are out from school and working my little hobbies to the quick.
Yes.
But anyway, the Ukraine leaflet thing, well, it comes across as like a ridiculous provocation at this point. It's one thing it will do is it'll certainly get everybody to comment officially on their stance.
Yes. Well, the only advantage is right. The only advantage is if somebody would take the time to say, well, that is such an egregious document. It could not have come out of thin air. And even though we don't know who to ascribe it to at this point, which side, no side wants to take blame or credit for it, it ought to cause thoughtful people to say, and to do what we did, to study the Ukraine and realize it's the most savage people on earth relative to Yahowah's chosen, and to look at their history. I mean, and if you do that, you'd say, well, why are we fighting for them? Why are we rewarding them with money? Why are we saying that we're going to defend these people? Shouldn't we just say, oh, God, good riddance?
Right.
Well, hopefully it'll provoke some thought.
Right. It is crazy. But my guess would be, it sounds to me like it would be more something that might have come from like the Nazi thugs, Timoshenko, who uses as useful idiots,
yes.
Her muscle, or somebody with enough brains in the muscle Nazi brigade thought it up,
Yeah, but keep in mind here that to some degree the Ukrainians created this a mess, and the way they created this mess is that when they took over the government, they said that they wanted the elected government to stand trial so that they could kill them for their crimes, and then they turned on the police that were surrounding the protesters in Kiev, even though they had kidnapped them as protesters, even though they had shot and killed some of them. They then wanted to have a witch hunt against the police force. So the people that are in uniform that took over the buildings in the eastern Ukraine were members of that police force that decided, if we stay here in the western Ukraine, we're going to be lynched. So they went to the eastern Ukraine at this point, and now they're in opposition to the government. That's what has transpired here. So, as an previous arm of the Ukrainian government, the most anti-Semitic government probably on the planet today, it's very possible that this kind of mindset could come from either side, because they were once one side.
Well, actually, given what you just said, these people moved, to the eastern, and they're against the government. This actually puts more and more, pushback against the corrupt government, and it exposes them all the more. So what better thing to do than deflect attention from yourself when it's becoming ever more apparent what you are?
Correct.
So who are you going to vilify? When you need to get attention off yourself and vilify someone else, who's your go-to population?
Right. Yeah, my first thought was that it was a false flag, that it was something that was being blamed on the separatists, because it deflects attention as to the true moral decadence and depravity of the Ukrainians themselves. And so when you accuse your adversary of what you yourself are through a false flag, it's the most effective term or tactic in a debate when you're having a debate with ignorant and irrational people, which would be most people in the world today. And so that's how it struck me. But I didn't want to say that is what it has to be, because, you know, you think of the nature of the Russians that have lived here. You know, Odessa is one of the most crossover cities which is where the worst of these atrocities took place. And so, you know, I don't want to exonerate one side, even though the other side is pure evil. That's not to say that you can't say I'm in favor of one and opposed to the other here. It's bad and perhaps worse.
I think it's significant that the rabbi of Donetsk,
yes.
He just says this is a provocation. I'm kind of like, well, he's on the ground,
right.
Living there, and he's one of the, in this case, chosen people to vilify. I think.
And by the way, and he's not identifying it with either side, because he was asked who do you think did this, and
it's a provocation.
Right. He says I don't have any idea which side it came from. I think it's just a provocation. Let me underscore that realization. If you go back to prior to World War II in the Ukraine, in this area now that's called the Ukraine, it used to be New Russia, was part of Russia, but in this area, if you go back prior to World War I, about 8% of the population was Jewish. If you go back to World War II, it was about 6% Jewish. Right now, it's 1/10% Jewish. 1/10%, which means that the Jews no longer represent a viable foe to prey upon. This is not like Nazi Germany and Austria and places like that, where you could go in and confiscate great wealth and you could have a scapegoat that represented a significant minority. They are insignificant today, which underscores the fact that they're simply being scapegoated, that there's not enough of them to even bother with. And so that is really what we find ourselves with in the Ukraine, and no one knows who's done this or why.
I would suggest it's you know how in the military you have electronic countermeasures and then electronic countermeasures and then electronic countermeasures. Okay.
Right.
Same thing with the false flag thing. It would be counterproductive, I would suggest, for the pro-Russians to try and use a ploy like this to further vilify.
Correct.
The rogue government, because they're so good at vilifying themselves, you don't really need to put your reputation at risk to further vilify these idiots.
Right. It would be exactly like what the situation in Syria, where the United States was blaming Assad for gassing his own people, when any rational person looking at the circumstance said there's no reasonable way that occurred, because it would be suicidal for Assad to do it, and he had the upper hand, and all this, so that a reasonable person is going to say, no, that was promoted by the rebels to bring world attention and anger against Assad. The same thing, just logic tells you, understanding the situation, that's probably the same case here, that it was perpetrated by the Ukrainians to make the Russian separatists look like villainous terrorists. So that's what reason tells you.
When the world government is doing such a good job of ruining its own reputation, there's no need to try to help by risking a lie.
Correct. And in this case, it's really interesting that there really is no difference between the Russian separatists in New Russia, eastern Ukraine, and the separatists in Kiev. They both have equal legitimacy as it relates to their takeover of government buildings. They're a mirror of one another, and there is a way to settle this. And it really is clear. The same thing that happened with Crimea should happen with the eastern Ukraine. The fault line is clear. There's a river that runs right through that section of Ukraine. It gives 3/4 of northwestern Ukraine, all of western Ukraine, and which is 3/4 of the landmass. It gives it to the Ukrainians. They can have their own state. Nobody wants anything to do with them. And let the Russians reintegrate back into Russia. it is the way to handle this. And I just wish we would stop browbeating them.
The Sharks and the Jets both want to take over New York, the streets of New York. You know?
Yes.
They're both a couple of street gangs, and one's as legit as the other. You mentioned something before about the history of Ukraine.
Yes.
We encourage you to look up Web Tarpley stuff about the manipulations of the German general staff in the World War I, post-World War I era, and how the German general staff, coalesced this Ukrainian government into existence,
right.
into exchange for material goods.
Yeah, no, there's no question that even Putin has brought this to our attention. Putin refers to the eastern Ukraine as New Russia, which was the term of the eastern Ukraine during the Tsarist times. And so he specifically, Little Russia and New Russia was the term for the eastern Ukraine during the Tsarist times. And he says, how in the world the eastern, New Russia and Little Russia got integrated into the Ukraine he says, that's a mystery, but what you're saying is really not a mystery. It was orchestrated by the Nazis.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the time that it took place. And so what we're doing here, and what Putin wants to do here, what we should want to do here, is undo the influence of the Nazis and allow the eastern part of that country and the southern peninsula to reintegrate into Russia, and allow those who don't want any part of Russia to stay apart from Russia. It's the best solution. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. There is a reason that we continue to go back to what's occurring in Syria, what's occurring in Israel in terms of what the United States is trying to compel Israel to do, which is to forfeit its land and security, and what is happening in Ukraine. It all leads to the same place. Just as in the first part of the program, we said that if you are religious and you're looking for truth, you're looking for God, go where the words lead. Just go where the words lead. Well, the same thing is true in politics and militarism and all these conflicts around the world. Go where the words lead. Find out where they take you. And when you see anti-Semitism, when you see condescending rhetoric, when you see negotiations where one side says that was a good day's work, and then the other, and the same side saying, yeah, well, we'll see if the Russians are going to take stop being provocative here and see if they'll honor their commitments to the international community. When you see that kind of rhetoric, go where it naturally leads, which is that we're acting very badly. And we're being pathetically condescending as if we have the right to control something that we ought not have anything to do with. And this is far worse than an election between the lesser of two evils, and between Democrats and Republicans in America. This is between socialist, secular humanists, ex-communists, and Orthodox Christians who are the most anti-Semitic people on this planet. Economically deadbeats, all of them. Not saying that there are some good people in Ukraine, probably are. But as a collection of people, this is a really rotten group. We don't belong there. And we need to get our nose out of everybody else's affairs. And if there was a lesser of two evils in this case, it's the Russians, not the Ukrainians. Choice is an important thing. Why not let people choose their own destiny? That's what the United States fears, and we don't want them to do that. We want to impose our will. It's not about people being able to choose their fate. That's what God, in this testimony, went on to say, they shall continually be abandoned and forever forsaken, together, completely, and all at once, for the birds of prey in the high places, and for the beasts of the realm. What's he talking about there? He's saying that those of you who are siding with man, who are wrap yourself in the flag, who vote in these elections, who empower these nincompoops that are putting the whole world on the precipice of war, that all together and collectively, you're all going to be abandoned, all at once. And you're going to be the prey of those birds of prey in high places. They're going to take advantage of you, as will be the beasts of the realm. He's talking about demons in the second part. In the first part, he's talking about the political and religious powers. By siding with them, they will victimize you. That's why God doesn't want you to show any allegiance to a political or military or religious institution. The very people that you are trusting are the very people that are taking advantage of you. That's what this prophecy says. And that collectively, all at once, both the victims and the perpetrators, there will be a day where they will be viewed as one. And that day is this great election between candidate Y, Yahowah, and candidate A, the very things that America stands for. Glenn, I suspect on that day that you're going to be with me and we're going to be enjoying Yahowah's company in heaven. But for those that we care about, for those that we love, boy, I hope that many make the right choice. It'll be the ultimate election, the last of choice.
It's very tough, especially when you're dealing with family and friends. It's tough. It's one thing to try and speak truth to someone you don't know and you expect maybe diffident, but when you really have a vested interest in getting someone to see, it's tough.
One of the things that was really encouraging for me today is that when Anthony called in from New Jersey, and he said, there's a group of us that have come together and collectively we have now recognized that Christianity is a fraud, and we've left the religion, and we're coming to study together Yahowah's Word. There's a group of about 100 people in Republic of South Africa that are doing that. There's about 100 people that are part of Larry's Facebook site that have done that. There's several hundred people that are part of the Yada Yah forum that have done that. There is some advantage of trying to do this together, and I appreciate being able to do this show together with you, Glenn. May God bless you all.